everyone. Welcome to the podcast. We have our regular contributor, Mr. Bill Holter, the one and only, joining us for a deep dive, as usual, on the latest financial situation, both here in America and globally. We always look forward to getting his take. So if you're new to the podcast, please do like, subscribe, and share, as it helps the channel grow and others to gain in the knowledge that you're being afforded. As you know, we've dubbed Bill the Tom Homan of the financial service industry. He is a precious metals aficionado with over 23 years as a stockbroker, and he's been working with Miles Franklin since 2012 as his clearinghouse of choice. And he also has his own website, billholter.com, where you can get all his latest updates and musings. And we are honored and delighted, as always, to have him. Bill, thanks for being on the podcast today.
Thanks for having me. Hope
Oh,
my
it's a
dogs
pleasure.
stay quiet.
No problem. So, Bill, the first question is it just me, or does it seem that the revalue points to hyperinflating the currency, meaning the US, to deal with the debt, aka savers, retirees, people on fixed incomes and pensions, basically the whole middle class, is going to be challenged going forward? Or do you think that revaluing the dollar and gold is really going to make all the difference? What are your thoughts?
Well, it's obviously going to wipe out present value in dollars. I mean, whatever the dollar drops by, dollar assets are going to drop by. I mean, that's really the reason for the BRICS in the first place, is because foreigners collectively are looking at the dollar and thinking there's only one solution, and that solution is to devalue the dollar.
Mhm.
And of course, part of the danger of that is what happens to the credit markets. I mean, we are absolutely, the U.S. is addicted to debt. I mean, the deficit going up, what, 2 trillion plus per year. Who's going to fund that debt? And I think, I forget what the number is, it's 9 or 10 trillion that's got to be rolled over before the end of this year. So who's the buyer going to be? And buyer of last resort, of course, is the Federal Reserve / Treasury itself.
Yeah, exactly. You've always said the Fed plays prominently in that. And yeah, BRICS. You're talking about BRICS. I have a couple of questions on that. Obviously, we'll touch base on. So it is going to be curious going forward. Speaking of which, on the BRICS, Warren Buffett, as you know, at 94 is finally resigning, turning his company over. I think we kind of knew at some point sooner or later that was going to happen. But what I thought was interesting is he's been advising people publicly to own other currencies, particularly BRICS-related currencies, away from the dollar, as you just said. And as you know, the whales always buy things up right before a big shift's about to happen. So why do you think he's saying this? Can you think of anything else specifically besides gold and silver he's referring to with that?
Well, no, he's referring to foreign currencies. He's not referring to gold and silver.
Yeah.
And his father, who was a U.S. senator back
Mm.
in the 1930s, 40s, would be sorely disappointed in him, because if you look back in history, his father, after the 1933-34, the confiscation, and then gold no longer, or dollars no longer being convertible to dollars, his father was one of the absolute foremost proponents to staying on or going back to the gold standard. So Warren Buffett has been 180 degrees from his father. And I mean, Warren Buffett over the years, what's he called gold? A box of rocks, uh, an arcane relic that you buy it, you put it in the dark, and it stays in the dark. It's useless, blah blah blah. Well,
Mm-hmm.
he said that ever since 1971, when it was $35. So when we touched $3,500, that was a hundredfold increase in gold, or call it a 99% drop in the value of the dollar. While all along, he's been an opponent of gold and a proponent of nothing but paper assets. And I think he should go back and he should look to January 1st of the year 2000. What's been really the best asset to own since 2000? And the answer is gold, until recently with Bitcoin. But I mean, that's a whole nother discussion. I mean,
Right.
Bitcoin is, when all said and done, I think it's going to end up, you're going to see that it's nothing. But other than Bitcoin or crypto, gold has been the best asset to hold since the year 2000, with, by the way, no risk whatsoever. When I say no risk, gold can never bankrupt, can never default. All other assets can. So if you own gold in the year 2000 and you still hold that same gold today, you've had the best ride available with with the least or no risk whatsoever.
Yeah, and as you've always said consistently on our podcast, Bill, gold will be the last man standing. So that makes sense that you would say that. I kind of thought you were going to say that, but it's better to just ask the question than assume. So I wanted to kind of rule it out either way. Speaking of gold and silver, obviously, just changing the subject for a minute there from bricks. We'll come back to it. The gold and silver ratio, as you know, has been north of 100 over the past couple of weeks. I believe this has only happened 2 or 3 times in history. Seems like such an obvious gift to silver investors and stackers, particularly in precious metals, who take advantage of it. Can you give us your perspective and what you're recommending to your clients right now?
Well, yeah, it is a gift. And I have, over the last week, I've had some people call me looking to swap gold into silver, particularly in IRA accounts where it's not even a taxable event. At 100 to 1, that's 10 times or even more than 10 times God's ratio. And when I say God's ratio, silver comes out of the ground at less than 10 to 1 compared to gold. Yet
Mhm.
man's ratio is 100, slightly plus to 1. Uh, so you just got to ask yourself which one's right, God's ratio or man's ratio.
Yeah, well, speaking as a believer, we know the answer to that for sure, and you're absolutely correct. It's interesting because I just had our fellow friend and colleague Andy Scheckman on last week, and he was telling me that his experience has been that people are paying now in cash to get the precious metals because they're not taking chances with what's coming in the market. And he's seeing about an 8 week delivery time. Is that your experience as well on your end?
An 8 week delivery time on what products?
I
Because
believe
most
on
products are. Go ahead. I'm
I believe
listening.
it's on gold is what he was talking about, if I remember right.
Uh, if you're doing gold eagles, and that's if you're an American, you want either eagles or the pre-33 gold. Um,
Mhm.
I I'm not sure what product he's speaking of because those are readily deliverable. I mean, you can't go through with a huge order on uh, on pre-33 gold. I mean, if you had a $1 million order or less, you should get your product within a week to 10 days. And uh, Eagles are available now. Silver Eagles, we've been pretty much cleaned out of backdated Eagles. So what we're doing is we're taking orders on the Silver Eagles. We've got some in inventory, but any
Okay.
large order, yeah, they would be backed up on the silver side.
Yeah, I'll have to go back and refer with him on that. So it could be the size and scope of the order. In regards to purchases, are you seeing a disparate gap between those who buy here in the U.S. versus those who are overseas with the London and COMEX CBMA?
I'm not privy to what is actually being taken and by who on either LBMA or COMEX, but you can
LBMA, I'm sorry.
see, yeah, just look at this month of May. It's looking like this is going to be another 80 plus million ounce month. Now, keep in mind, the world only produces about 850 million ounces of silver per year. So if we're having months where COMEX delivers 80 million ounces, that's roughly 10% of global production just in a month's time and just on one exchange. I mean, those are, you're talking about 1,000 ounce bars there. You're not talking about uh, orders with coin or 1 ounce bars or what have you. I mean,
Mhm.
that is, you're talking about, uh, industrial use primarily. And of course you get some mints that actually buy 1,000 ounce bars and then produce their coin. So you're talking about two separate markets there.
Gotcha. Thank you for clarifying that. Speaking of overseas, as you know, the announcement of the China tariff deal sent gold and particularly gold miners down substantially a few days ago. As more of these trade deals get done with other countries, do you think it'll have any long-lasting impact on the global economy and the price of precious metals going forward?
Yeah, I don't personally think that the drop or the pullback in gold really has much to do at all with the tariffs. I mean, if you look at a chart, gold got overbought on a daily basis, on a weekly basis. And it was due for a pullback. I mean, you could look at a chart and you could say, well, gold could still pull back to 2,700 or 2,750, 2,800 in that range and still be perfectly fine on a chart basis. That would just pull it back to the original trend line that started back in October of what was it, October 23, when the Treasury basically sequestered the 300 billion of Russian reserves. From that day forward, gold, started grinding higher like a tractor in first gear. So, then that trend line formed a new trend line steeper, and that's what we're testing now. And if that breaks, you could see $2,800 gold, and no harm, no foul. You're not seeing physical gold being sold. What you're seeing is paper gold contracts being sold, and the tail still wagging the dog. But that is not going to last forever. As
Mhm.
I've said for years, my partner Jim Sinclair said for years, when all is said and done, the cash markets are going to take over the pricing mechanism from the paper markets.
Right. Right. No, thank you. That makes a lot of sense. And just, circling back to bricks for a minute, you're seeing some interesting inversions and shifts, at least I am, in terms of, you're seeing gold and silver kind of, vacillate a little bit, but that's good, like you said, because it's a buying opportunity. Ultimately, you can buy those dips, but you're seeing oil, particularly Texas crude in your area, going down. You're seeing the Dixie go down a little bit, which, obviously affects the foreign currency markets in a positive way, as far as what, Warren Buffett was saying. So it's just interesting to see all these moves and counter moves happening. Bill, I know you're a big proponent of being prepared, like myself, in every way. At the end of April, as you know, a major power blackout occurred across the Iberian Peninsula that affected the mainland, particularly Portugal and peninsular Spain, where electric power was interrupted for about 10 hours in most of those areas. Do you think this is a dress rehearsal of what might be coming for America? And can you just remind my audience some of the most important ways that they can prepare themselves for situations like this that might be imminent?
Yeah, I don't know if it's a dress rehearsal or not, but all you have to do is just look at the grid in the United States. It's antiquated, um, and it's soft. Uh,
Mm.
Without any problems, we hear every summer, there's going to be power outages. Even here in Texas, what was it, 3, 4 years ago,
Mhm.
when we had that freeze for 8 days, the grid, the grid wobbled. So even without something nefarious like an EMP or some type of cyber attack, the US grid is pretty weak and pretty wobbly on its own. So providing yourself with some type of alternative energy source is a good idea. I mean, if you have the means to do it, it's probably not a bad idea to put up some type of solar grid. If you're in the southern half of the US, put up a
Right.
solar grid and have batteries for it. Have Tesla batteries or whatever, so you can run refrigerators, so you can run freezers. Uh, I mean, you're not going to be able to run big AC units, but you could put an AC unit in one room of your house. And I'm speaking of people in the South now, because here
Sure.
in Texas, I mean, yesterday it was 99 degrees. Summer finally arrived. Um, and I've said this in the past, and I think it's still true, is that people in the North in the winter are going to die, and people in the South in the summer are going to die just from the climate, just from the heat or the cold.
Right.
So it's, if you have the means to provide yourself with with an alternative supply, you should do that. If you don't have a lot of means, do something so that you're able to charge cell phones. That's if the cell towers are still working. But yeah, be proactive.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I'm glad you brought that up about the cyber attack, because that was something that I wanted to ask you about. So I guess this is a good opportunity as any to ask you. Um, as we're going away from the SWIFT system into this new asset backed system with precious metals, do you foresee the banks trying to use a cyber attack as sort of a distraction to get people away from the shift that's happening?
Yeah, I don't know if I would say the banks are going to do it, but yeah, I mean, I've said for many years now that once they realize that they've lost control and this thing's going to go down, they will kick the table over, and they'll do that, in a manner that they can point at something so they can say, our policies were working, our policies were right, except for this XYZ cyber attack or whatever it happens to be. There's going to be some type of false flag that they can point to and point the blame away from the policies that have gotten us to where we are.
Yeah, totally. They're going to use this. They're going to try to use a scapegoat in some kind of way. You're absolutely right. Bill, I want to show you a couple different articles here since it's very apropos with the week that President Trump has had. And I'll just let me know when you can see this here. As you know, President Trump was in the Middle East this week in a number of areas, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, signing all types of peace and financial agreements, specifically trade and commerce and currency related items. You even see here that he said his Middle East trip could bring in 10 trillion. As you'll recall, a couple of years ago, he was on record saying that China would have to pay at least 10 trillion for all that they've stolen from us in a variety of capacities. So I guess my question would be is, how significant does this week's worth of meetings in the Middle East seem to be in the long-term game of the U.S. economy in your estimation?
One thing is that it was speculated that the Middle East trip was going to be a disaster. And I think, looking at what's been done already shows that no, it's not a disaster. Some good things have come out of it. Some important, and let me say size-wise, deals are being made, but it's not going to do anything except for basically just tax revenue to fix the deficit / debt outstanding already. I mean, that cake is already baked. The collapse of the U.S. credit market is already baked. There's nothing that can be done at this point to make the debt payable. And I mean, look where we are now. We're going to be paying like 1.5 trillion alone this year on interest expense. That is completely not sustainable. And once we get further into the year and we've got more and more of this 10 trillion that needs to be rolled over, I think investors are going to figure out, hey, wait a minute, these numbers don't work.
Yeah. Well, you've always talked about this with me about, I believe it's John Rich, showing the true unemployment rate, the true rate of GDP growth and so forth. And it's going to be interesting, Bill, I wanted to ask you as a follow-up to this. So you and I have talked about speculating. We don't know the numerator, the denominator, right? But as best as we could calculate, the real true debt was somewhere between, I think, 263 to 300 trillion. Some are saying 300 plus, give or take. With what you mentioned with the real numbers that have been suppressed. But the real question is how much of that is actual consumer debt? And when he revalues gold, can that of itself offset the consumer debt?
When you're asking about consumer debt, what you're assuming is that the consumers, by and large, own gold, which would help their balance sheet. I think the real number is under 1% of the U.S. population even owns gold. So a gold revaluation is not going to help the consumer. It's only going to help those that actually hold gold, which is less than 1%. And it's going to help the central banks around the world that have been accumulating gold. And again, the question is, do we really have 8,300 tons of gold? I think no way. But even with 8,300 tons of gold, valued at today's pricing, it's not even $1 trillion. So, where does the price of gold have to go? Just for the U.S. alone to bail out the U.S. Treasury.
Well, you were saying, I think when we talked about this a long time ago on our podcast last year, if I remember right, you were saying, I think the real value of gold could be 125, 150 even further higher than that if you were to use that to pay off the actual debt, and that would put it out of reach for most people. So it's
Yeah, the numbers, it's well north of 125,000 an ounce now. If
yeah,
we were to use the gold that we supposedly have to pay off the debt that's on books, but that's only 37 trillion. What about the other 200 plus trillion? How does that get, paid off or backed or supported? And the reason I've been harping on this, just so people understand, is that the system, the way it is right now, is supported by credit. It's supported by debt. And if that debt is shaky, which, I mean, mathematically it is in the West, mathematically it is in the US, shaky debt is not a foundation. It's quicksand.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, and you look at your bank statements, that's more credit based than anything else. It's not actual. So no, you're absolutely right. I still am amazed that I know it's true, but I'm still amazed that only 1% or less of the population has precious metals. It just goes to show you the brainwashing and inculcation that the mainstream media, the deep state, and the banking system went for generations after generations to convince people that precious metals weren't real. And when you said it's always been God's money from the beginning of time. There's a lot of discussion now. Sorry, go ahead.
John, and that
Please.
brainwashing was definitely abled or helped by people like Warren Buffett.
Mm-hmm.
That's part of the psyop. Oh, gold is scary, scary. Stay away from it. I mean, Warren Buffett said that his entire career,
Right.
and very few people called him out on it. I wrote a couple articles over the years on Warren Buffett, but that is a huge disservice to the population itself.
I'm glad you said that. Thank you, Bill. And also add to the list of nefarious people, Jamie Dimon. And what the part they don't tell you is if it's not worth anything, why do they want it so badly? Because it's replete on their balance sheets, but they never tell you that. So you're 100% on that. Thank you, Bill. There's a lot of discussion now about gold prices and where they could land this year. One article is suggesting that gold could reach $10,000 before year's end. Jim Rickards, he's saying 25,000 or more. Again, with no set numerator denominator that we can see of yet, hard to know that. But as you're seeing the gold prices, as you mentioned, changing rapidly, and as you said before, it can't hold much longer. They can't paper it down much longer. Where do you see it going this year?
I mean, the answer is higher. I mean, as far as pinning down a number, and I've said this for quite a while now, whatever number you hear from someone, as gold is going at such and such number, no matter what, that number is going to be too low when all is said and done. And I just refer back to look what happened in Weimar, Germany. Before there were even computers, an ounce of gold was 170 Reichmarks in 1916 or 1917. And by 1923, it was 3.7 trillion per ounce. And that's without computers. And without, when I say computers, without being able to create money supply digitally with the keystrokes. I mean, they are actually printing those notes. Not printed anymore. It's all done electronically. And in a debt meltdown, the central banks all over the world are going to have to do QE on steroids in order to stabilize. But what that does, it's going to undercut the existing money supplies outstanding. And when money supply blows up and the currencies drop, gold does nothing. Silver does nothing. They don't go up. They don't go down. They don't move. An ounce of gold today is going to be an ounce of gold in a year or 10 years. And it's the same ounce of gold that was 100 or 200 years ago. Gold and silver have done nothing. It's the measuring stick, whether it be dollars or euros or yen or what have you. It's the measuring stick that has imploded. And when all is said and done, values are going to be measured in terms of ounces, not in terms of fiat currencies.
Good point. And to your previous point, Bill, it'd be very interesting just to mop this up to see once President Trump and Elon Musk do officially audit Fort Knox and then successively the Fed, it's really going to make a case to get rid of the system. And you're right, as that QE prints up, that just accelerates the further demise of the Fed Reserve note dollar. So, and Weimar Germany, that what you're mentioning, was a couple of years after the Federal Reserve was enslaved upon us. So,
Do you really believe that Fort Knox or even the Fed is going to be audited? The only reason, though, the only reason the Fed would be audited is if the current administration wants to do away completely with the Fed. Because, I mean, if they did an actual audit and to find out how dirty and just how dirty the whole thing is, the public would jump it up and down to abolish the Fed. And then the next question is, what happens to the value of the dollar itself? The dollar would have already imploded.
right.
The only way that they're going to have an audit of the Fed is if they've got a central bank digital currency ready to go and they want to roll it out.
Which I don't believe they're going to allow to happen over here. I know they're going to push that over in Europe, but it's going to be interesting. Sorry?
We'll see.
We'll see.
I think
Well,
that's the plan. I think the plan is to get central bank digital currencies all over the world. I know Trump has said there will be no central bank digital currency, but in a crisis with markets imploding, credit markets imploding, real things exploding in dollar terms because the dollar's imploding, they're going to use a crisis such as that to foist a CBDC on the public because the public will be begging for help. And that help is going to come in the form of a central bank digital currency.
right. And they're going to try to create a solution to the problem that they themselves inherently created. But the good thing is with good people like you to help, we can create a backstop or an insulation to get around the agenda that they're trying to do, especially if we take action early enough and consistently enough.
Yeah,
Right now.
we
Yeah.
got to take the action now before this happens because once this happens, all the
Too
exit
late.
doors are closed.
Yeah, it's too late. No, you're 100% about that. A couple days ago, it was announced that Iran redenominated their currency to drop off 4 zeros. This seems like a tactical desperation move since they have massive sanctions imposed upon them by President Trump. Yet they're working with Russia to do oil trades behind the scenes. Do you see this as a survival move by Iran and do these, whatever it's going to be, I think a couple hundred or so trade deals that President Trump is currently undergoing will allow for the sanctions to be lifted off of Iran, which would set them free economically? Or do they become the odd man out in the global economic equation?
Well, yeah, they've been squeezed, no question about it. And whatever they're doing is try to basically in survival mode. I would not be so brash as to forecast what Trump is going to say or what he's going to do, because you don't know from one day to the next, what the new policy is going to be. I mean, as far as is he going to lift sanctions on Iran? Who knows? There's no way to know.
Yeah, it's just an interesting discussion because this earlier this week in the meetings in the Middle East, as you know, he lifted him off of Syria and he just said, and I think it's more of a negotiating tactic from his previous real estate days. Hey, Iran, get a deal done quickly, or it's not going to end well for you. So it'll be interesting this cat and mouse chess match that they have going. What's really going on behind the scenes that we won't know until after the fact. Well, Bill, as always, go ahead, please.
John, hang on. I do want to comment on that.
Sure.
Trump does need to be careful that he does not overstep or overextend as far as on any of these deals or any of these negotiations, because he's acting like he's coming from a position of strength.
Mm-hmm.
He's not operating from a position of strength. The fact that there is, I forget whatever the number is, 100 or whatever the number happens to be, nations in BRICS tells you that nations have already decided to exit the dollar.
Right.
We are no longer the biggest, baddest ass in the world as far as a military goes. I mean, could we, in a conventional war, could we fight China? Could we fight Russia? Could we fight the two of them together? Certainly don't think so. I mean, our military well, our military has fallen behind. Financially, we are a house of cards. And I mean, if you see this, if I see this, if you know average people see this, you
Mhm.
can bet the Russians see it, the Chinese see it, the other 100 whatever plus countries that have joined BRICS, they see it. I just hope that uh, this doesn't turn around and backfire on Trump, because I don't believe that he's really negotiating from a position of strength.
Well, I'm glad you said that. I'm glad you said that, Bill. Thank you, because yeah, that plays into what we believe too. I mean, the BRICS already has the unit, as you know, last October, that they're already using as a tradable instrument. Like you said, something real for something real. They're already doing that, and it is 100 nations, part of Operation Sandman, to de-dollarize, particularly the Federal Reserve dollar. So what we're advising our audience is to be contrapuntal against the old system, right? The Keynesian system. Get into things that are precious metals, asset backed, which is one of the main and many reasons why you're here, to provide invaluable information and advice for that. So thank you for that additional comment. Bill, as we wrap up, respecting your time, last words for the audience, and also where can people find your work?
My last words, really, for the last 6 or 8 months, has been just do the best you can. Uh, if you know, if you know and understand that there's a problem, that problem is going to be that when you dial 911 or you need some type of service, it's not going to be available. So you need to have the mindset of you're going to be on your own for a period of time, whether it's 2 weeks, 2 months, uh, God forbid more than 6 months, because you'll have people dying just from starvation, lack of food. Uh, just do the best you can, and you know, don't don't procrastinate. Don't postpone it. Get it done, because 1 second too late is your lifetime too late. If you want to check my workout, my website is billholter.com. There is a contact button on there if you want to reach me. If you want to reach me directly through my business email, that is bholter@proton.me.
Great. And we'll put all those links in the description, as we customarily do, Bill. And as you folks know, we are aligned directly with Miles Franklin as our main sponsor for precious metals. 35 years in business with nary complaint. Bill uses them as his main clearinghouse. So do mention that you saw him on our podcast. If you should call him, he'll take good care of you regardless. That just ratchets it up to another level. And I know that he will be able to guide you ship to shore safely. Bill Holter, thank you for joining us on the podcast. We appreciate your time and expertise. We hope you have a great rest of your day, and we'll look forward to seeing you again shortly.
Thank you, John. You too.
Thanks, Bill.